not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, who is free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am.
All right, why doesn't everybody stand up? Stand up. First of all, go on ahead and give the sign of peace to the people right around you. And as we're standing, let's sing this refrain. Who the Son sets free is free indeed. I'm a child of God. And it's something that we have to remind ourselves of. You know, it is an opportunity for us to grow in humility, for us to grow in faith, to grow in knowledge. But we have to realize that, like, we have so much to be thankful for, but also we are children. Like, in God's eyes, like, there is so much more wisdom, so much more that he wants to give us. And if we don't have a childlike faith, if we don't have a childlike attitude, then we don't end up receiving even a fraction of what he wants to give. So let's not just sing this, but let's actually pray it. Amen? Amen.
Who the Son sets free, oh, he's free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. One more. Who the Son sets free, oh, he's free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am.
All right, so I'm just overwhelmed with relief, thanksgiving. So super excited about our speaker tonight, but I lost his number, and so we're out there at 6:30, 6:40, 6:45, and the speaker's not here. And so then I'm thinking, all right, what am I going to do? What am I going to talk about, right? So you guys get to hear me tonight, right? No, I was like panicked, you know, and I saved his number under a set of notes called interesting. Brilliant. My organizational skills are through the roof. Anyways, so I did get a hold of him, and he was already obviously en route. So he just left his house from Atlanta, and he drove super fast and got here. So I'm excited about that. But so I had an opportunity to go to a pro-life dinner a couple years ago. I don't even know how long ago it was, but he was the guest speaker there. And I was very honored to receive an award for just promoting pro-life for the youth through the years, because it was kind of a longevity thing. And since I've been doing this since World War II, pretty much outlived anyone else, right? No, but so I just thought, it's just a straight fundraising thing, and it was actually just a beautiful honor. And the award was named after a good friend of mine's mother that passed away. And so she, this award was like in her name, and that was an additional honor because I had no idea, you know. And so they had the speaker this night, and so I'm like, okay, you know, we'll let's see how this goes, you know. And he was awesome. He was just so good, and I was just so moved. And so I shared with a couple other people, and I remember Jen Ricard, you know, she went online and she was just looking up a bunch of his videos and everything. I'm like, we have got to bring him in. Like, we have to bring him in. So we had tried for the last couple of years and finally had an opportunity to bring him in. And he was very gracious in working with us. And so we're just super excited to have him here. And so I just encourage you just to have an open mind and an open heart, and just to receive whatever it is that God wants to give you through this. Amen? All right, so let's bring Ryan on up, and then we're going to pray for him. So can Lena, can I have you come up and say a prayer for Ryan?
Could everyone please extend a hand? In the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. God, just bless our hearts throughout this night. Please have us all just like come in with an open heart and an open mind to this talk that he will give us tonight. God, I just pray that you can just bless our hearts and lift up our faith to you throughout this night. God, I pray that any tension, any stress that he has on him right now, that you just lift it up and let any words that you need to just go right through him, and any words that you need to touch anyone here, that he can just bless all of our hearts through this talk that he's going to give us. And God, I just thank you for bringing us all here tonight for this opportunity to hear this. And I hope that everyone here can just get a little bit out of it. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, with that. Whew. Well, it's awesome to be here. I do have to correct a little something because I didn't drive from Atlanta. I actually flew from D.C. Driving from Atlanta would have been hard, but still was here on time, but still wasn't on time. But that's a whole other thing. Some people have different time orientation, right? Am I right? Some people are gifted in it, some others aren't. Anyway, I have to keep to time tonight, so I want to make sure I cover some of the stuff that I really would love to address in Abortion 101, and if it's possible, maybe we can turn down just a little bit of the lights that we could see the screen here. But I am originally from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Has anybody ever been to Lancaster, Pennsylvania? Yeah? And it's funny because I do travel all around the world, and I've been asked often, because Lancaster is the home of the Amish. Has anybody ever seen the Amish? Don't watch the reality shows, they're not even real. But anyway, Breaking Amish or whatever that is. But I used to be babysat by Amish, and it's funny because people ask me, well, are you Amish? No, because I like electronics, for one. I do love the Amish. They're an awesome community. My grandparents, I guess, were Mennonite, so that's kind of like a light version of Amish. But I hail from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. We're based actually in northern Virginia right now. Has anybody ever heard of Loudoun County, Virginia? School board's gone wild? Yes, that's where I live. And so we're based there, but we started in Atlanta, Georgia. And my wife and I really felt moved by God to do something about a lot of these cultural issues that Christians especially were quiet about. How many of you feel really comfortable talking about the easy subjects like abortion, racism, fatherlessness, the list goes on, the war on common sense? It's not easy. So my wife taught for 13 years in public school. Her last 3 years were in Philly, and she's now homeschooling mama and sometimes longs for the riot lockdowns of Philly. Philly was no joke. But she taught for 13 years in both public and private school, both suburban and urban. I worked as a creative director in the ad agency world for 13 years. And you know, there are times in your life when you feel like, God, why am I even here? Why am I doing this? And then you have to remember the proverb that says, do all things without what? Grumbling or complaining, which I'm still working on. But in that, I didn't realize that God was fine-tuning the skills that he had given me so that my wife and I were able to launch something like the Radiance Foundation. And we do this because there are so many issues to cover, so many issues to tackle, but too often Christians don't know how to engage in the conversation in the first place. Sometimes we don't know how to engage in dialogue. We don't know how to frame the issue. And so this is what we love doing. We love framing the issue. If you go to radiance.life, it's the easiest way to get to our website. There are lots of graphics. There are videos. There are weekly op-eds. I write for Town Hall. I write for Christian Post. We do extensive amount of research because we want to equip you to know not only how to talk about these issues, but how to think about them and what to pray about, because it's important for us to not be silent. One of the resources that we created as well, it's actually written by my favorite author, it's my wife, Bethany, who wrote this book, Pro-Life Kids, because she had a friend who came up to her. This is 3 years ago now. A friend who came up to her and said, well, I want to take my kids to the March for Life in DC, but I don't know if they're old enough. And so she said, okay, well, the march, and she asked, the mother asked, well, what kinds of things go on at the March for Life? It's not just the march, there are all kinds of seminars and conferences. And so she said, well, how old is your child? And she said, oh, well, she's 13. See, the world is targeting our children at the youngest of ages. We can't wait until they're teenagers to engage on the social injustice of our time. And so what she did is she created this adorably illustrated children's book that teaches an age-appropriate pro-life worldview. We would have so much less work to do to change the mind of an adult if children were actually taught a pro-life worldview. And so that's one of our tools. And of course, we all know that historically something happened on June 24th where Justice Alito said the Constitution does not confer a right to abortion. Roe and Casey are overruled. I don't know if you remember where you were, but I do remember where I was. I was in my office. My wife was at the Pro-Life Women's Conference. My kids were at camp. Our staff was at the conference with my wife. And so she called me on the phone, and she's crying on the other. I'm like, what's going on? What's going on? And she said, they overturned it. She could barely get the words out. So here I am. You know, I'm the kind of guy who will ugly cry. I don't know how many guys admit that you ugly cry from time to time. But I was ugly crying. I was trying to get a video out on Instagram, and I couldn't even get a few words out, but finally pulled myself together. But I remember that day because when I think about all the things that tie me to this issue, growing up in a family of 15, where 10 of us were adopted, having a wife who faced a situation that I'll talk about a little later, having, out of my 4 children, 2 of my kiddos were adopted. I mean, there were so many emotions that overtook me. And I do have to remember, too, when we talk about the issue of abortion, we're always relentless about exposing the industry that exploits, but we're always compassionate toward anyone who has made that decision for abortion. Women who've gone through it and men who may be the ones who push the woman to it. We serve a God of wholeness and healing, amen? And there's always, we have great resources. If you go to radiance.life/heal, there are resources, there are pregnancy centers in this area that provide post-abortion healing and recovery. And I want to encourage people to do that because this is not an easy issue to talk about, but we don't have the luxury of being silent. The rest of the world's talking about it all the time. In fact, there's a new children's book that celebrates abortion. You know, it says, what abortion is, but then it actually doesn't tell you what actually an abortion is, but it celebrates abortion. And so we live in a world where we're always told about bias. Has anyone ever heard that word, bias? Bias is an overused and very abused word. Bias is fine because we use bias all the time. You use bias to decide which clothes you're going to wear. You use bias to decide which people you're going to hang out. You use bias to decide where you're going to go if you're walking down a street late at night. And are you going to walk down the dark alley? No, because you're biased towards something that's well lit. Bias is not inherently wrong. And what's really important with bias is that it is always good when it points us toward the truth. And so that you can understand my bias on the issue of abortion, I have to kind of go back just a little bit to my family, to my tiny little typical American family of 15, so you can understand why I'm really passionate about abortion.
Life is never picture perfect. Human beings come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, and abilities. No matter how much we plan, no matter how much we think we're prepared, the unplanned happens all the time. It's how we respond to the unexpected that shows our true humanity. But many do not see the value of every human life. Too many are willing to discard those who don't fit the picture of perfection. Abortion destroys the chance to love and to be loved. We never know what will fill the frames of our lives, or how empty those frames can be when we allow exceptions.
Every life is a gift.
What's interesting is that is actually a controversial statement. To say that every life is a gift. We live in a culture that tells us that, well, only if you want that life, then it's a burden. But I grew up in a family that would have been written off simply because we didn't fit the picture of perfection. Some of us weren't planned. Some of us had disabilities. And so my family's filled with those that the world would write off. We're plenty of marginalized kids in our family, but my parents didn't see us that way. My parents didn't see or focus on how we came to be. They focused on who God meant for us to be. And so this is the original Bomberger family, obviously a little small, because I guess every family has to start off small. But these are the original Bombergers, my parents, Henry and Andrea Bomberger, and my three first siblings. I'll call them the homemade ones. I don't know, whatever you want to call them. The prototypes, they were the first ones, I don't know. So these are my older siblings, and people will often say, well, look, this is picture perfect. They had 3 kids, they're good. But what they don't know is that my mom had a heart for adoption that started at the age of 5. Because people often ask me, well, what inspired your parents? What influenced them to adopt 10 children? They already had 3 children of their own. I hate that phrase, just to put that out there. Whether you're biological or adopted, you are that parent's own children. And I know people don't mean anything by that. Also, another label I don't like is when they say, well, what about which ones were the natural siblings? What does that make me, unnatural? So I'm just talking about language. We'll work on that language. But this picture, which we often hear the phrase, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? But sometimes you still have to explain the picture. Because what you don't know by looking at this picture is that my mom, at the age of 5, had to go into a children's home for a year while her alcoholic father and mother were separating. Her father was emotionally and psychologically abusive, and so in order to protect her, she had to go into this home for a year. And it was in that home at the age of 5 that a little girl, her whole life was radically transformed. People often underestimate kids. I mean, you teenagers in here, anybody ever underestimate you? Guys in the front row, anybody ever underestimate you? Just one person admits it, okay. They do it all the time, and the younger you are, people are like, oh, they don't really get it, they're not really receiving the word. Yeah, we underestimate the way that they receive and they perceive the world all the time. And at the age of 5, my mom noticed that another little girl who had physical disabilities had nobody to come love her. No one to her mom didn't visit her dad didn't visit her. At least my mom had her parents visit her separately, but no one came to show that girl any love. And so that broke my mom's heart, and she remembers getting down on her knees, praying to God. God, first of all, she invited Jesus into her heart, and then she asked God to help her be a mommy to those who don't have one. So that's what the picture doesn't exactly explain. And so along came me. I was the first one adopted in the family. I was brought into the family at 6 weeks of age. And my mom, who had tried to connect with her father all his life, even though he kept rejecting her, she knew that his only way to experience healing and wholeness was through Jesus. So she never gave up on him. So he'd been involved with the family when it was just 5, but the moment they talked about adopting me, I don't know if you noticed, but my skin is brown. So the moment they talked about adopting me, he said, and I'm going to clean up the language. He said, if you bring that black child into your home, you're going to ruin your family. So my mom, after years and years of trying to love her father, had to lose a father in order to gain a son. So the moment that they adopted me, he had nothing to do with our family the rest of our lives. He missed out on 13 amazing grandkids who could have loved him, he could have loved us. I will say my parents chose well, they chose me. So thank you, Mom and Dad. And this is an old article. My parents didn't do many interviews because they always felt like journalists didn't understand what adoption was. That journalists would say things, it's so great what you're doing for that child. But adoption doesn't just change the child, it changes the family, it changes the community, and sometimes it changes the world. And I love the title of this because I felt like the journalist understood adoption in our family and the journeys that we were all on. It says here, unwanted children find they're wanted. See, the whole thing about unwanted child is just really part of an ideology that is the basis of the abortion industry. If you're unplanned, you're going to be unwanted, you're going to be unloved. That's what they say. My parents shattered this myth. There's no such thing as unwanted. I mean, maybe some of us have been unwanted by a biological parent or parents, but we are all wanted by someone. And in my family, I was the favorite. I'm like the bottom here with the checkered collar. Anybody the favorite in your family? Do you know what I'm talking about? All right, see, you're proud about it, favorite in the family. My youngest daughter, Aaliyah, is always telling everyone that she's my favorite. And I do have 4 favorites because I have 4 children, but she won't accept that, anything less than that, labeled the favorite in the family. But I exist, my kids exist, because of the courage of my birth mom. And so when we talk about the issue of abortion, we talk about, because you can't talk about abortion without talking about adoption. It's like not finishing a sentence. You can't have a discussion about one without the discussion of the other. And when I think of birth parents, and it's typically the mom, but I'm also not trying to exclude the birth dad, but it's typically the birth mom who is left to make a decision. And it's a very powerful and difficult decision because it's a lifelong decision. There are only 2 alternatives to the violence of abortion. There is parenting or the parenting choice of adoption, making a plan for adoption. Now I want to show you what supposedly unwanted looks like. So anytime, because I don't know what image you have in your mind about unwanted child, but people use that phrase all the time. So whatever image may come to mind, I want to replace it with this image. This is just my extended family, my brothers, my sisters, their spouses, their children. There is only one extended family member, as in like aunts and uncles. There's one little grandma in the middle of the picture. But this is my whole family. 65 strong in this picture, right? Some people are like, oh, the Duggars. No, the Bombergers. And this, what's crazy is this was taken 6 years ago now, and there are 15 more lives added through marriage, adoption, and new births. But see, this picture is possible because of 2 parents who defied the world's low expectations, who love those that the world said, well, they won't amount to anything. The world always says low expectations, and I thank God for parents who didn't listen to the naysayers. It's also possible because of courageous birth moms, women who chose to be stronger than their circumstances. People often ask me, well, have you met your birth mom? I haven't. Years ago, I searched for her. And in the search, I actually had to petition the court to unseal my records. And all I wanted, I wrote this song called Meant to Be. I said, I just want her to have the song. You know, I had just gotten my master's degree, and I thought, I just wanted to know, here are all the things that I've been able to become in my life. And so, several years ago, I decided, well, I want to try to make that visual. I wanted to show all the things I've been able to become in my life because of my birth mom's singular decision. Now, I've not met her. There was no response to the search. But I figure, how can I, as a creative, how can I thank her? What can I even say? What words would even be, I don't know, sufficient to thank a woman who went through 9 months of a traumatic pregnancy? So I created this video, wrote the lyrics, sang the lyrics to this, and I just show all the different things that I've been able to become in my life by the grace of God because of her singular, courageous decision. And so even if I don't ever meet her face to face, which I hope I do because I will ugly cry that day too, but until that happens, and maybe somehow, some way she sees this online. But this is my tribute to a courageous birth mom.
You couldn't see what I would be. It wasn't part of your plan. Stronger than your circumstance, you gave my life a chance. Touching the future before it began. You're the reason I am here. I know deep down in my soul, my life has purpose. I know deep down in my soul, my life has purpose.
It's not exactly easy summing up your life in like a minute and 20 seconds. But I am, and I hate when people use the word literally, and they use it all the time, but I literally am the 1% that's used 100% of the time to justify abortion. Whenever you have a conversation about abortion, it inevitably gets to that question, what about rape? Even though my birth mom experienced the violence of rape, she didn't make me a victim of the violence of abortion. It's interesting when we ask the question, what about rape? So seldomly does anyone ever talk about who actually should be punished. The rapist should be the one who's punished. And we think the natural follow-up to such a horrific act is abortion, but abortion is more violence. See, abortion impacts a woman regardless of the reason for the abortion. It still affects her emotionally, psychologically, physiologically. I just pray that my birth mom got the wholeness and the healing that she needed. And what people who experience such horrific, just inexplicable kind of violence, what they need is true healing, not abortion hucksters who make hundreds, if not thousands of dollars just from the act of abortion. What terms do we use to describe abortion? Can you just call them out? What are some of the terms that our culture uses? Don't be shy. Choice, yeah. Procedure. Freedom. Say it again. All right. You have to say it a little louder. Necessary, okay. Healthcare, yes. We heard, especially during COVID, that abortion is essential healthcare, right? People's businesses are shut down, but which business was not shut down? People couldn't even get major surgeries. But which business remained open? Abortion mills. These are all the terms that we use. Family planning, removal of pregnancy tissue, reproductive freedom, my body, my choice, pro-choice. There's so many terms. Now, with abortion, there are two kinds of abortion. There is spontaneous abortion, which is what a miscarriage is. That's nobody's fault. Induced abortion, or an elective abortion, is very different. So when I'm talking about abortion, I'm not talking about something that deals with someone has an ectopic pregnancy. That's when the egg, the fertilized egg, which I shouldn't use that, the embryo, doesn't make it to the womb, doesn't make it to the uterus. And so when it's in the fallopian tubes, it can cause death to the woman. This is not part of the elective abortion, induced abortion. There are those who try to say, oh, it's about miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies. That's a lie. When I'm talking about abortion, in this Abortion 101, this is what we're talking about, the intentional killing of a preborn or partially born human life. and for reasons, mostly 99%, that have nothing to do with any kind of threat to the life, physical health of the mother, rape or incest. So if I can get maybe 2 guys and 2 girls to quick come up, just quick. Anybody? I guess it's kind of harder for the people in the middle, but if you're in the end, come on up, just come on up, don't be shy. Shy people. 2 guys, 2 girls. Thank you. This is very easy. This is gonna be painless, I'm telling you. Just painless. All right, what's your name?
Jake. JP.
Lena.
Evelyn.
Okay. This is just about, we're just going to go into the history of abortion. All you have to do is be the first one to raise your hand. What is the year that the Roe v. Wade ruling was delivered by the Supreme Court? Which year? Do you need a lifeline? It was way before you were born. Rhymes with me. It's in the 70s.
1973.
You're right. Give me a hand. And you get some Chick-fil-A. Thank you guys. Go back and sit down. 1973 was when that ruling came down from the Supreme Court. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it was legalized in states just a few years prior. Up until 1973, almost every state had criminalized abortion. But there are a handful of states like New York or Colorado or California that allowed abortion. In fact, they called it therapeutic abortion. In California, they called it the Therapeutic Abortion Act, and it was signed by, anybody ever hear of Ronald Reagan? It was a pro-life Governor Ronald Reagan who signed the bill into law, and they said it's just for the cases of rape and incest and the life of the mother. California today aborts over 100,000 human beings every year. It's amazing. It starts off what people think is seemingly harmless and innocuous, and they call it things like therapeutic abortion. But Roe v. Wade came down in 1973, and that same day, actually I'm getting ahead of myself here, I'm gonna go to the founding feminists. This is what their take was on abortion. Founding feminists, anybody ever hear of Susan B. Anthony? Elizabeth Stanton? This was their newspaper, it's called The Revolution. And in the right page there, they wrote an article. Can you see the title of the article from where you are? They're referring to all abortion, not because it was illegal, but to all abortion, and they called it child murder. These were founding feminists. That was their take. Alice Paul said abortion is the ultimate exploitation of women. It's amazing how much feminism, so-called feminism, has changed. Who was Roe? Because to understand Roe v. Wade, oftentimes people don't know who. Roe was the name given, it's kind of like the generic name given to the person without using the person's actual name. Roe in Roe v. Wade was actually Norma McCorvey, the late Norma McCorvey. And what a lot of people don't know is, one, she never had an abortion. The baby that she was pregnant with at the beginning of this case ended up being adopted and loved, not aborted. A lot of people don't realize either is that the Roe v. Wade case, which began in Texas, all started in a lie. And what was the lie? Norma McCorvey had lied and said that she had been raped, which is why she was trying to pursue an abortion. She admitted in the 80s that she made the story up. And that was the beginning of Roe v. Wade. In fact, this is Norma McCorvey and her lawyer, Gloria Allred. And the thing that's so sad, and this happens all the time, Norma McCorvey detailed this when she was alive, that she was just used. She was just there to be a pawn, and then she eventually became pro-life, had given her life to God, and she became a Catholic and fought against abortion almost to the end of her life. And then something weird happened in a documentary where she said that it was all just pretend. I think there was so much brokenness in Norma McCorvey, but she is the Roe v. Wade, and there was nothing pretend about her decades of fighting against the injustice of abortion. These are the two rulings. On the same day in 1973, there was the Roe v. Wade ruling that said abortion was allowed through which month of pregnancy? Third? Which month? Roe v. Wade allowed abortion through the 7th month of abortion. What we hear from mainstream media all the time is that it allowed it through the 3rd month. No, that's not true. We've been so misinformed for so many decades. It allowed it through the 7th month because they said that was the point of viability, the 7th month. Then that same day, another ruling came out from the same Supreme Court, Doe v. Bolton, that said, wait a minute, abortion is going to be allowed through the entire pregnancy, including partial birth abortion. That's when the baby is partially birthed. I'm sorry, this is graphic, but the skull is crushed, body parts are crushed, and the rest of it's removed. Doe v. Bolton also said the reasons that a woman can get an abortion in Roe v. Wade, and it said, here are all the reasons. And it basically said, for any reason at all. Emotional, psychological, familial, economic. It listed every reason why she could get an abortion through the entire pregnancy. A lot of people don't realize that. And so when we talk about Abortion 101, I kind of have to touch on the numbers. I'm not going to go deep into these numbers, but just so you understand and have a bigger picture, each year there are about 1 million abortions committed in our country. In 2020, actually, the trend has been going down for years, but since 2017, they've now ticked back up. And so in 2020, there were 930,000 abortions. And you can see by population, by people group, who has the most abortions. It's the black community, which has been by historic design. But abortion, no matter the hue of skin, is always a tragedy. It's not just the exploitation of women. It's not just the destruction of the unborn. It's also the excusal of the responsibility of the man. Roe v. Wade empowered, we're told, empowered women, right? It empowered women. No, it empowered men to have sex and run. And for those who didn't want to run, it gave them zero power to protect the life that they've helped to procreate. Let's look at your state. In Ohio, there were 21,813 abortions in 2021. In fact, your numbers had been going back up as well. Just to put that into context, that's 60 lives aborted in Ohio every single day. We have so much more to offer as a society. As Christians, John 13:34, we're called to love one another. Jesus is saying that, love one another as I have loved you. And his kind of love was self-sacrificial love, not the culture's understanding of love. See, our culture believes in sacrifice, but it believes in the sacrifice of others, because that's easy to do. But sacrificing yourself? Giving of yourself? I don't mean just your whole life, but that is part of it. But giving of your time, giving of your resources, that takes something. So let's just talk about some of the common lies when it comes to abortion. How about this one? When does human life begin? We don't know. Really? We don't know? Do we know? When you have a discussion, and I don't encourage debating unless it's an actual debate, but when you have discussions about abortion, don't preface this with, well, it's my religious belief or it's my belief. It's not a religious belief that human life begins at fertilization. It's a scientific fact. And it's been known for a long time. In fact, 95% of biologists in this study done by University of Chicago, they surveyed 5,500 biologists, and 95% of them confirmed the scientific fact that human life begins at fertilization. We know this. I don't know what's wrong with the other 5%, but 95%, that's pretty much a consensus. This is, I was in a debate on NPR with, actually the president of Planned Parenthood was supposed to debate me. President of Planned Parenthood in Maryland was supposed to debate me, and she backed out 20 minutes before the radio show. And so they had a delegate step in with her. But the interesting part of the conversation was with the radio host who said, he goes, what's your problem with Planned Parenthood? What's at the core? What's your problem with Planned Parenthood? I said, they kill innocent human beings. And both the host and the delegate's eyes all wide. He goes, what do you mean? What do you mean? I said, well, what do you think abortion is? Because, well, it's not killing a human being. We don't know if it's human. We don't know if it's human. That's not scientifically proven yet. I'm like, wait a minute, wait. You're trying to tell me that the offspring of human beings is not human? Well, we don't know this. I'm like, okay. I'm used to people arguing that it's not a person, which that argument, especially as someone who is brown, is really an interesting argument. Every human is a person, and every person is a human. And when we get that wrong, well, just look at our history. Chattel slavery, leading into Jim Crow. And it was interesting to me that the host was also black. And I said to him, I find it amazing that you're actually arguing not only that the unborn child is not a person, but that the unborn child is not even human. Well, what is the unborn child? Well, we don't know. NPR, that's why it stands for National Pro-Abortion Radio. Seriously, it's just ridiculous. I mean, if you have like a legit argument, then bring a legit argument. But if you're going to, when I love this, they call pro-lifers anti-science. I'm like, there's nothing more anti-science than a pro-abortion movement that denies basic biology. I have a great article on our website. It's radiance.life/fake health, because I can't dig deep into this because I only have a moment to touch on this. But I mentioned the emotional, physical, and psychological consequences of abortion. For instance, women who have an abortion in their first trimester, that's the first 3 months, drastically increase the risk of preterm births. What a preterm birth is when a child is born before the child is fully developed in the womb. Preterm births are the leading cause of infant mortality. When a child is born, thereafter the number of deaths within a year of that child being born. And preterm births are a leading cause of those deaths. But what people tell you is that abortion is completely safe. It's like having your tooth pulled. Really? Do people have support groups mourning and regretting having their tooth pulled? Again, comparing something so drastic like the act of abortion to having a tooth pulled doesn't show someone that's truly caring about the individual. This is actually from a major study done by the National Academies of Science. You've probably heard of them. But this is what they do. It's tucked all the way back in the back of the study on page 625 out of like 730 pages. 625, and they're saying, here are the medical risk factors. They say immutable. That means they've known this, it doesn't change. Immutable medical risk factors associated with preterm birth. Can you guys read the third one down for me? They know this. Medical associations know this, but yet they still say it's perfectly safe. And it's not perfectly safe. I really want to encourage you to go to radiance.life/fake health and just read. And every time we write articles and we post articles, whether it's on our website or our op-eds on Town Hall or Christian Post, we always link to the primary source. So if there's ever a question about a statistic, ever a question about a claim that we're making, we always link to the data. We have to know. If you're pro-life, you have science on your side, you have history on your side, and you have the statistics on your side. And this is important. Let me kind of put this into a context that, I don't know, might make it a little more interesting. Because they keep talking about, well, women are dying from being pregnant, right? Well, every life lost is tragic. But understand, in 2019, there were 754 women across the United States who died while being pregnant. But yet every single committee that is developed by the CDC or a state review committee says that none of them offer abortion as the solution to the solvable issues with maternal mortality. But I put this in context with car accidents, because women die at 15 times the rate, or I'm sorry, the 15 times the number of women die in car accidents than those who are pregnant. But you don't have people saying women shouldn't be in cars. Would anybody like that idea? Women don't go in cars because you die at a far higher number? But this is what they're saying. Women shouldn't be pregnant. Like, pregnancy is the problem. It's not the problem. It's not getting the access to the prenatal care. It's not actually taking care of yourself. It's the obesity. It's the drugs. There are a number of reasons why, and those are approachable. Margaret Sanger. Anybody ever hear of her? She is the mother of Planned Parenthood. In fact, she came up with the phrase, every child a wanted child. That was her phrase. I need 4 more people to come up. Can I get 2? I don't care if they're adults or teenagers, 2 guys, 2 girls. I just want to give it, make it an even split. Hurry, not much time. Don't be shy. Unless you don't want Chick-fil-A, in which case that's fine. I'll just take them home with me. Come on up. What's your name?
Zach Kremser.
Sam.
Gabriella.
Kennedy.
Okay. I'm just wondering if you can tell me the word that has to deal with, it was a science. Most people call it a pseudoscience, a fake science, during the 20th century that believed that some people were better born than other people. Do you guys know what that word is? Starts with you. Oh.
Eugenics.
Yes, give that man a prize. There you go. Thank you, man. You should probably share it with him because I think you guys were kind of like collaborating there. It's called eugenics, and eugenics believe that some people were better born than others. It just means well born, but it was a pseudoscience that believed that certain parts of the human population were worthy of life and others weren't. In fact, I just want to play a clip. I'm going to skip ahead here. Wait, how much time do I have, by the way? Who am I looking for? I have 10 more minutes, and then we can do 10 minutes of Q&A? Sweet, okay. Let me just read this quote. Oh, by the way, this is a brochure from Planned Parenthood. This is from the 1930s, and it's about birth control, but they're asking a question in the middle panel, well, is this birth control an abortion? And Planned Parenthood answers, abortion kills life after it has begun. They knew that in 1938, but they don't know that in 2022? When your business model changes, it's amazing what happens. This is Margaret Sanger, and this is her take on birth control. This is why she's called the mother of the birth control crusade. And this is why she developed birth control. These are her words from her book, Women in the New Race. She says, birth control itself, often denounced as a violation of natural law, is nothing more or less than the facilitation of the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives or those who will become defectives. Does that sound like women's empowerment? She had a very negative view of humanity. In fact, I just want to play a little clip for you so you can fully understand the brokenness of her worldview. She's being asked by 60 Minutes' Mike Wallace if she believes in sin, and this is her response.
Do you believe in sin? When I say believe, I don't mean believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin.
Who here was marked when they were born? Who here knows what the next person, the person beside you, to your left or your right, or in front or behind you, what they will become? But yet Margaret Sanger presumed to know this, that certain parts of the human population were just marked when they're born. You know who we're marked by? By our Creator. In Psalm 139, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. But she didn't have that outlook. She had a very broken outlook when it comes to humanity. One of the most common lies, and I'm going to jump ahead to another section after this, people will say, well, anybody hear the whole hangers and in the protests? The hangers, we're not going to go back, we're not going to go back. This is from this quote is from 1959. It's from Planned Parenthood's own medical director. She said this in 1960 when she said this. She said, abortion is no longer a dangerous procedure. It was 1959 she said this. She said, abortion is no longer a dangerous procedure. Not true. 90% of all illegal abortions are presently being done by physicians. She also declared there were only 260 deaths in the whole country attributed to abortions of any kind. Call them what you will, abortionists or anything else, they must be doing a pretty good job if the death rate is as low as it is. But they'll still go on with that hanger myth. Anything to scare people into embracing the lie of abortion. Now, because I'm going to have to skip this because I tended to stay a little long on some of these things, but I want to talk about Planned Parenthood's numbers, because it's really important to understand who and what Planned Parenthood is. How many of you heard that Planned Parenthood only 3% of their services are abortion? Anybody hear that? Which it doesn't matter if it's 3% or 0.3%. It's their business. It's what brings in over 85% of their revenue, health services revenue. Fact sheet is out there. Planned Parenthood for over a decade has had medical services, major medical services to women plummet. Girls and women need to understand this, because when they used to say they're women's leading healthcare provider, and now they say they provide healthcare to everyone, but they don't. Major medical services to women have been plummeting. Here, and I don't know if you can see these numbers, but breast cancer exams have plummeted 64%. Pap tests down 65%. Prenatal care down 73%. But guess what's not down? The violence of abortion. And guess what's not down? Their profits. 70 million last year. In fact, this year they made over 110 million. In fact, we have a new one coming out. And this is important for us to understand the difference between true feminism and what I call fake feminism. In fact, I have my daughter joining me in this little promo because I have 2 girls, 2 boys. I want my girls to understand they do not need to, they're not made equal by the violence of abortion. They're not made equal because they're more like guys who cannot conceive, who cannot nurture a life within them. I watched my wife give birth. Any of you guys watch your wife give birth? I was ugly crying at that moment. I wasn't prepared for what all that was going to look like, but I'm telling you, we're equal, but we're not the same. Can I get an amen? Women, you're amazing. Guys, we're amazing too, but we're definitely not the same. Let me just go to this little promo that just talks about fake feminism and continues with some of the lies. No, I have to skip this.
In Massachusetts, right now.
Here we go.
They love to tell ya abortion's so good for ya. Just pay a fee and get equality. Their fraud's extensive, their lies defenseless. Planned Parenthood's been counting for a century. It's fake feminism. It's fake feminism. It's fake feminism. They don't want you to know. It's fake feminism. It's fake feminism. It's fake feminism. All they want is your dough.
This is basic health care.
Thousands of women died before Roe every year.
We're not political. Planned Parenthood, we're nonpartisan.
Planned Parenthood is fake feminism. Fake feminism. Fake feminism. They don't want you to know. It's fake feminism. Fake feminism. Fake feminism. All they want is your dough.
So that's just a little jingle to remind you of what fake feminism is. Because right now we have an attack on our pregnancy centers that's saying, you know what? They call themselves pro-choice, which to me is very interesting when they try to shut down every choice other than abortion. So you have activists trying to shut down pregnancy centers and saying, like, for instance, that women are tortured at pregnancy centers. Let me show you what torture looks like. Right here, this is torture. It's torture to actually distribute millions of free baby items, furniture, diapers, formula, clothes, maternity wear. That's torture. Free. Hundreds of thousands of parenting classes. How many know how many pregnancy centers are in our nation today? Does anybody throw out a number? Say it. They're about 3,000. 3,000. In fact, in your state, I just want to show you, when you go to pregnancycenters.org, if you go to pregnancycenters.org and you put in your zip code, Here are there are about 20 locations within a 50-mile radius of you guys here. 20. They far outnumber the abortion mills. And they're gonna stay with the mother, not just once she has the baby, but for years after that. So when I talk about what does society have to offer to those facing the unplanned, abortion's easy to offer because it requires nothing of you afterward. But you've got pregnancy centers and maternity homes. There are 450 maternity homes throughout the nation. You know how many of these are run by pro-abortion groups? Can anybody give me a number? 0. Who are the people who care about people after they're born? 450 maternity homes. If you don't know what a maternity home is, it's where a mother who's facing an unplanned pregnancy is able to have her child and live in a residence typically for about 2 years. They provide life skills training, they provide GED completion. There are a host of things that they provide, job skills training, so that she's equipped and she's protected and she's safe and she's loved. We've helped raise millions for pregnancy centers and for maternity homes for years. And so if you don't remember much of what I've said tonight, remember this. Some of the best things in life are unplanned. I know this deeply, not just because of my own story, but I know this because of my wife's story. This is actually an ultrasound of my wife's biological daughter. You know, my wife was a teacher, and it was amazing the pressure from fellow teachers when she found herself in her late 20s as a single woman, pregnant. She had just walked away from a horrible relationship that was abusive, only to find out that she was pregnant. She felt all kinds of shame, and her fellow teachers, thinking that they were being compassionate, said, well, just abort it. Just abort it. She never considered abortion, but the pressure on her, people would say, well, you can't continue your career. What are you gonna do? You're gonna throw your whole life away? She didn't throw her life away. It's amazing because that little girl beautifully and radically changed her life. In fact, my wife was at the appointment with the ultrasound where she saw just the heart beating. And she knew, even if she was gonna be a single mom the rest of her life, that she would never feel shame. She'd never want her daughter to feel shame. In fact, she went home that night, and in her journal, because the biological father wasn't there, he wanted the baby aborted, he wanted nothing to do with it. She went home, read this journal, and then in the margin it had the verse, Psalm 34, 4 and 5. It says, and I sought the Lord, and it relieved me of all my fears. And those who look to him are radiant. They are never covered with shame. And that's why she named that baby girl Radiance, which is the reason for the name of our organization.
Good job, give me 5.
This is that baby girl today. Second from the left is my Ray Ray. She's 18. She just turned 18. My kiddos, Aaliyah, who's 14, my Ray Ray, my oldest son, Makai, and my youngest son, Justice. And I mentioned that 2 of my 4 were adopted. That's Ray Ray and Justice. We adopted them on the same day, 2 hours apart in the Georgia courthouse. I will tell you, I was definitely ugly crying that whole day because it was miracle after miracle that made that possible. And I'm just going to end with this before we just do a little Q&A. My baby girl, Aaliyah, who loves to sing. Anybody here like to sing? Love to sing? A few of you? Well, my Aaliyah would never sing in front of other people, and anytime she offered to sing at home, I'd be like, yes, yes. So that video that you saw earlier of all the things I've been able to become in my life by the grace of God and the courage of my birth mom, she came in as I was working on that. She said, Daddy, I love that song. And she was 11 years old at the time. She said, Daddy, I love that song. She goes, can I sing to it? I'm like, yes. Because anytime she offered to sing, I'm like, do it. So I just hit record, and I'm not kidding. She comes up with her own harmonies. Girl's ridiculous. I know the sound is not that great coming out of this for some reason, but she's singing this song, and all I could think of is that she would not even exist if my birth mom didn't choose to be stronger than abortion, stronger than her circumstances.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Shine through me. Oh, shine through me. Shine, shine.
When you let the light of God's love and His truth shine through you, you make lives like mine and my children, my family possible. That's my story. Thank you, guys.
An amazing testimony. Russ, can we get a little more on this one? Let's just, we've got, we're kind of, my watch was wrong. We're pretty short on time for Q&A, but we're gonna do a couple right now, primarily teens, and then we're gonna have Ryan available right after this for people to ask questions. And again, that will be for teens first, and then for anyone else that would like to ask him any questions. But does anybody have a question?
Don't be shy.
Oh, come on.
No one has a question at all, really. Who's gonna be the courageous one?
Here we go.
So a lot of the time, like when you're arguing with someone who's pro-choice, an argument that they'll bring up is it's not the banning of abortion, it's the banning of safe abortion. And what do you say to that?
When you say it's not the banning of abortions, it's, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Well, first of all, no abortion is safe. It always kills at least one human being. Sometimes it kills the mother, so that's not safe. You're ripping apart a human being limb from limb, so that's not safe. Also, there are the majority of studies on abortion and its impact on women show that the physiological impact is great, that the psychological impact, the negative mental health outcomes from abortion, you've got the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association pretending that there's zero negative mental health outcomes after having an abortion, and it's a total lie. Millions of women will tell you that it's a total lie. So when they say safe abortion, what does that even mean? There's nothing that's actually safe that is actually causing a woman harm, that's killing another human life. So it's this whole thing. They love putting together these euphemisms that actually are meaningless. Safe abortion, now they're calling it essential health care. But you have to be able to respond, well, what about the women who've died? Because the problem is women who die from botched abortions, they're the acceptable collateral damage. Tanya Reeves, Lakeisha Wilson, Jennifer Morabelli, I mean, the list goes on and on. It's okay that they die because abortion is more sacred than a human life. So there's no such thing as safe abortions. And what's interesting is they say we're not going to go back to the back alley, and now they're pushing chemical abortions, which have even more complications, and do-it-yourself abortions. That is the back alley. So I would challenge anybody who says safe abortions and talk about why don't they care about the physical outcomes, the emotional and psychological outcomes that women, millions of women around the world experience. So, good question.
Okay, we have time for one, possibly two more.
I've had people dismiss me before because I'm too young to have an opinion on abortion. So I was wondering if you had any advice for what to do if someone immediately says, because I'm not an adult and allegedly haven't seen the horrors of what society can do, if there's anything I can do to combat that.
Are you too young to have an opinion on mass genocide? For instance, are you too young to have an opinion on the Nazi Holocaust? No. It's interesting because when people say that you're too young or you're the wrong gender or whatever, fill in the blank, it's because you do have a legitimate reason to oppose it. For instance, you don't have to be, people say, well, unless you're, which is interesting for me, because unless you're going to adopt all those kids, well, I've adopted 2. I can't adopt millions, but I've adopted 2. But they're always trying to throw something out there to just discredit you. Like with abortion, no uterus, no say. Well, it's interesting because I know plenty of women who've had a hysterectomy. They no longer have a uterus. Should they have no say? Men are 50% of the biological equation. So when people say something like that, you could say, what's the age limit for you to say, hey, something's wrong here. I want to do something about it. So I would just dismiss that and keep on being passionate about addressing injustice in whatever form it takes. There's no age limit. I thank God that my mom was 5 years old when she got the heart for adoption.
One more. Anyone? Any teens? Okay.
There's somebody pointing somewhere.
Right over here.
Okay.
Do you know the number of people who choose adoption over abortion?
Sadly, it's way low. There were 930,000 abortions we'll just give you a bigger picture, 930,000 abortions in 2020. There were just over 79,000 adoptions that same year. This is part of the problem. There is no federal mandate or law that says you have to report the number of abortions or that you have to report the number of adoptions. So part of our information is, abortion numbers are from the CDC and from an organization, a radically pro-abortion organization called Guttmacher. What we do know is that less than 2% of women facing an unplanned pregnancy make a plan for adoption. I mean, less than 2%. It used to be higher, it was as high as 9%. But now that the acceptance of abortion as some sort of solution that actually doesn't solve anything is embraced more and more. So unfortunately, the numbers of women who choose to make a plan is so drastically low, which is why there are so few babies available to be adopted. In fact, part of what we do through the Radiance Foundation, we have something called the Henry and Andrea Bomberger Adopted and Loved Fund. It's named after my late father who passed away 2 years ago from COVID, not from being infected by COVID, but from being vaccinated. He was one of the ones in the nursing home that was locked down for a year. So the adoption fund is named after him. And the problem is we have the funds to give to families, but we have families waiting so long because there just aren't enough children available for adoption. Now there are still 60,000 children available in the foster care system each year, and those lives are just as precious. No child should ever age out of the foster care system, but that's a really great question. Unfortunately, compared to abortion, the numbers for adoption are so small. We have to do so much better as a society.
And I think that's a great transition point. First of all, I want to thank Ryan for being here with us. Just an incredible... And we're going to be going into small groups here to have a little bit of discussion. Ryan's going to go out into the narthex for the teens. If you have some questions that you have, you can miss small group and go have an opportunity to meet. There's also some of his books and materials out there. But before we transition to that, I just want to say, if there is something that should really come out of tonight, every teen in here should really consider, is God possibly calling me to adoption? Is God possibly calling me to adoption? Because it is something that every married couple should discern. Every married couple should discern. And Ryan and I had the opportunity to talk for a couple hours the other day, and so like for Michelle and I, we weren't able to have children, and so all of our kids were adopted, and I thank God so much for the blessing that's been. Not to be like embarrassing or anything, but like my son John Paul, his birth parents were confused and didn't know what to do, and they weren't ready to have a kid, and they weren't married. And thank God the gynecologist said, like, there are people, like, adoption is a good choice. And so they chose adoption. And like, I thank God that his birth parents had the courage to give him life, because I can't even imagine life without him. And I have lost a grandchild to abortion when my son was in prison, and the girl was confused and didn't know what to do. And like, I wish that we could have been there for her, because 1,000% we would have taken care of that child. And when there's somebody at school that gets pregnant, you guys, how do you treat them? There's a reason why there's so few pregnancies in high school, and it's not because people are virgins. There's a lot more abortions that take place than you realize. And it's because of the way that we ostracize and the way that we treat them that they often feel like they don't have another choice. And so we have to love and support. And the last thing I want to say is my sister is a counselor, and she has a counseling practice, and she specializes in PTSD. And over 50% of her clients for PTSD had an abortion. Like, let's love them both. Let's love the child and the mom. Because nobody wants to talk about how that affects the woman years afterwards. They brush it under the rug and they say, they're fine, they're fine, they're fine. They're not. They're not. And we're called to love them both. So here's a couple discussion questions for you. What from Ryan's story may have given you a new perspective? What from his story and message was in some way hard or difficult for you? And just be honest. It's okay. And then we're going to take some time in small group to pray. And we'll pray for those things, and we're going to pray for anyone who's faced with an unplanned pregnancy. Guys, we believe in the power of prayer. I would like to encourage every single teen, actually everybody in here, to make a commitment that every day you will put an alarm in your phone and say a prayer for some mom who's really confused and doesn't know what to do. Every day. And pray for that child in her womb. Every day. Just a quick little Hail Mary. A quick little, please God, give them strength. You have no idea the difference that prayer can make. And we're going to start tonight, okay? So Ryan will be in the narthex. If there is a question that you have, you can go to ask him. Parents, I ask that you allow teens to go to the front of the line if they end up showing up. And then teens, if you could, throughout the church here, let's go into small group for a little bit, and then we're going to come back together to pray in about 10 minutes.